So the next definition that we're going to work on is called finished floor, and there are there are terms in the hollow metal industry that are, if you're new, they may not mean a lot, and they won't mean a lot. And speaking for myself, the risky thing to do is to subconsciously conclude that you know what the meaning is without studying what the hollow metal meaning is. When, in my career, when I have, certainly early on, assumed that I just understood how everything worked, mistakes are going to creep in, that's for sure. I had ordered some hollow metal one time. I had ordered hollow metal one time, not realizing that there are 4 ways for a door to swing. So the client was really clear that they were left hand out. Well, as we all know today, that's right hand reverse. And I said, well, if it swings in or out, I really don't care if it swings in or out. It's all good. It's left hand. Because frames are left hand or right hand, right? Doors can be left hand or right hand, but when you put it all together as an assembly, a left hand can be a right hand reverse. I had ordered the hollow metal just assuming left hand was okay, and it was, but the problem was I was so cocksure of how it worked, the vision frames were put in backwards. That kind of scenario. So the contractor called me and said, why is it that all the screws are on the outside? And I said, well, you ordered left hand. He's like, no, I ordered left hand out. And I realized, oh, there's nothing on my chart for left hand out, but the proper version of me should have translated that to right hand reverse. So finished floor is a term that's like that, in the sense that don't assume that you know what it means, because it doesn't necessarily mean what you might conclude it means. What I mean by all of that is you've got terms like undercut, terms like clearance, terms like finished floor, obviously, or subfloor. So all these terms come together. Let's talk about those a little bit more right now. When you take a frame, so talking about finished floor is going to be more of a definition of here are scenarios where that term will fit into the conversation, and be mindful of knowing that the term finished floor may not be a term that your client uses, because they're probably not familiar with the SDI glossary, and it may not be a term that makes a lot of sense. So if you're going to take a hollow metal frame and place it into a space, like right here, just this plywood floor, and below us there are certainly going to be joists, and there'll be a basement below this. If we were to take that frame and place it right here, is this the finished floor, this plywood that I have here? It may be, and it may not be. So this sort of situation may not be a finished floor, in the sense that maybe they're going to come and put tile or hardwood or carpet, because the term finished floor is really referring to where would you put your hand on the floor when it's all said and done. If this was the final construction of the flooring that's here in this space, yes, I would call this the finished floor, meaning your jam's going to sit right on top of the finished floor. This might be a subfloor, because they'll come in with some sort of flooring treatment. The reason that knowing finished floor is really important is because it affects what you'll do with your hollow metal. It affects what you'll do with your hardware as well, in the sense that you may have, this is a little heady, so if you're new in the industry, just go flow along. You may have floor closers that are going to be sunk into the floor, meaning they're going to be poured in concrete into the floor. You might then have an inch thick of something that's going to go over the entire floor. Epoxy, you might have concrete that will get poured, you might have flooring that will go in, you might have epoxy, You might have lots of different scenarios. The dimension from the subfloor to the finished floor, when those are different, and they're usually different, is really important to understand, because in this scenario, the length of your spindle on the floor closer is absolutely impacted. You will likely need an extended spindle because the spindle that the arm sits on won't be long enough to get to the door. But also, as it applies to hollow metal, your undercut, which is defined as the dimension from the bottom of the door to the bottom of the jamb, okay? That's the undercut. The undercut is generally 3/4 inch. Typically, if you don't define it to the factory, it's probably going to be that. So if you get the door hung in its frame and you measure from the bottom of the door to the top of the surface that the frame is sitting on, which could be the finished floor or it could be the subfloor, you should have 3/4 inch. It could be a little less, it could be whatever, but it's generally 3/4 inch. But when we talk about finished floor, you have to think of another term called clearance. Undercut, bottom of door to bottom of jamb. Clearance, bottom of door to the top of the finished floor. The important part is, finished floor is a component in this bigger conversation of, is everything that you're doing going to work? Meaning, is someone coming in with carpeting? Your jamb's going to sit down on the subfloor, and then there's going to be 3/8 carpet pad, another 3/8 of carpeting, and now all of a sudden you got 3/4 inch. Do you want the door grazing across the top of that carpet every time it swings? Nope. So you need to know what the finished floor dimension is as it relates to the clearance that you require for that application. Undercut is not clearance. Undercut is bottom of door to bottom of jamb. Clearance is what happens after you install the door and the frame, or at least the frame and what's left. Because if you come with a flooring condition on top of something, meaning now there is a finished floor, clearance is important. An example of that is, a very common example of that is, and you'll see it. You'll see where someone says 1/2 inch undercut. You'll see the specs, it'll say 1/2 inch undercut. And you're like, why do they want that? Because my standard undercut is 3/4 inch. Bottom of door, bottom of jamb. Now your door is going to be 7/8 shorter than the inside height of the frame because you have that 1/8 of an inch gap at the top. Forget about that. 3/4 inch. But the architect says 1/2 inch undercut. Well, why does he want that? Well, I'll tell you why. They want to suck that door down a little bit further, get it closer to what is going to be the net result of the space in which we'll call the clearance, because they want to use a bump up style threshold that's shorter than typical. Maybe one that allows 1/4 inch or something like that to the top of the threshold where the door will reside, and it has an overall height of about 9/16, meaning you've basically said to the hollow metal manufacturer, I need a 1/2 inch undercut rather than 3/4 inch. The door is going to be longer, 1/4 inch. The frame's going to stay the same size. And now the dimension that you're working in, within that clearance dimension, ends up being 1/2 inch, because your threshold will sit right down onto the concrete slab. In that scenario, your finished floor is actually the concrete that it's sitting on. Concrete's been poured, frame comes in, masonry wall gets built, frame is T-anchored in, doors hung, accessories go on, butts, locks, closers, trim and auxiliary, gasketing. Threshold goes right down. So in that scenario, your finished floor is that concrete. There's nothing else that's done. Now, another very common, right? Now, if it was me designing a building, I would want to suck that door down as tight as I could. I would want the height of my thresholds to be as short as possible. I would. As a distributor, I don't want to hear about 1/2 inch undercut because everything I stock is 3/4 inch undercut. Your over-the-counter trade is not going to be concerned about that. But it all is related to finished floor. Here's a different scenario with finished floor. Let's go back to the floor closer scenario, because I'm in Chicago right now, and this customer that I always think about, a grocery store guy on the south side of Chicago, and he had to be mindful of what he was doing in terms of projection off the floor. He was putting in gigantic walk-in freezers. It's a very large grocery store. And he had to be mindful of the stubbing that was going to come out of the floor for conduit, because he was coming in with a very thick layer of something. It was something and then epoxy over it. It may have been an insulating property, I'm not really sure. Something that couldn't be drilled into, in fact. And it made me realize, that's where extended spindles come in, because I've got my subfloor, my frame's going to sit on there, but if I add, let's just say 3/4 inch, let's say 3/4 inch hardwood, and I'm going to cope it around the bottom of the jamb, whoopsie, my finished floor has eaten up all of my 3/4 inch clearance. So in that case, you're probably going to want a 1 inch undercut door, and you will see 1 inch undercut doors as well, whether it be for a flooring condition where the subfloor is in, and then the finished floor dimension is going to suck up much of the standard clearance, and you have to compensate for that. Or I have seen in specifications where someone will call out a 1 inch undercut only because they literally want 1 inch of airspace under the door to allow for the movement of air for maybe an air handler, something like that, like a mechanical closet in a retail space. I've also seen the opposite, where they've wanted a 3/8 undercut because they were going to use a 1/4 inch threshold, and it was going to be gasketed really to an extreme amount because they wanted to have an STC rated opening at those areas as well. So again, finished floor is something that you've got to be mindful of. You've got to think about, am I going to be in trouble? And creating a holistic understanding of the opening is really important. Finished floor is one of those little details that could really get you in trouble. With NFPA 80, and now, historically, 30 years ago, you didn't have all this stuff about margins and doors no longer being fire rated. You gotta really make sure that everything you're doing when they're fire doors is tight in terms of being compliant. And you know what? It's awfully hard to cut a 1/4 inch off the bottom of a door. It's awfully hard to do that. So be mindful of it. The tricky part is you do have undercut as a definition, clearance as a definition. You've got subfloor and you've got finished floor. And I always remind myself, 10 pounds of sausage will rip a 10-pound bag. So make sure that you have the right allowance for everything. Meaning, two things cannot reside in the same space at the same time. So if you've got a 12-inch space in which to fit something, if you cut a 12-inch object to fit inside of there, it won't fit. And finished floor and clearance and floor and undercut, all that conspires. Let's switch this quickly to the screen view and let's take a closer look at the definition. If you are enjoying this video, please click thumbs up or like, and also please consider subscribing to our channel. Let's move on to the rest of the video. So what we've got here is finished floor. It says see floor. Let's scroll down and see what they come up with for floor. The top of the concrete or structural slab, also referred to as finished floor. Okay. Now, all of this that you see here defining undercut, I've gone into that at length. So you'll be able to find undercut and clearance, etc. So is the hollow metal definition a bit limited? I would say it is, because your floor is not always going to be concrete or structural slab. That's for sure. Okay, so there you go. Fire endurance rating, C fire rating. Let's move on to that one right now. Thank you for watching, and if you've enjoyed this video, please click thumbs up. Please subscribe and maybe even send the video to someone that you know. Thank you.